Sebentar saja lagi kita akan mendengar ucapan oleh Presiden Amerika Syarikat Donald Trump di World Economic Forum 2026 di Davos, Switzerland. Beberapa hari yang lepas kita menyaksikan pemimpin-pemimpin Eropah telah pun menyuarakan pendirian mereka berhubung dengan ketegangan hubungan sekutu antara Eropah dan juga Amerika Syarikat dalam konteks isu seperti Greenland dan juga beberapa isu yang mendesak lain termasuk juga tarif. Soalnya bagaimana untuk kita melihat apa butir bicara yang Trump akan saksi dan akan nyatakan dalam ucapan beliau, dan bagaimana pada akhirnya kita melihat World Economic Forum itu topik yang dibincangkan, didialogkan di sini akhirnya bertitik tolak daripada tindakan dan dasar luar Amerika Syarikat sendiri. Kita dengarkan dahulu temu bual saya bersama dengan Ju Lee, iaitu Head Regional Agenda Asia Pacific, member of the Executive Committee World Economic Forum. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Now, we're going to have US President Donald Trump addressing the crowd at World Economic Forum 2026. He had done so last year virtually, but this year he is present himself. And of course, a lot has been, have been happening since for the past year under his administration, and many of that impact have been discussed here in terms of topics that were picked under the sessions at World Economic Forum 2026. What can we expect? First thing, the reaction, because the discussion that we had yesterday and today, a lot of things, we talk about tariffs, we talk about how to maneuvering geoeconomic, geopolitical tensions. How do you make having him be present, and how important it is to have him under the theme of spirit of dialogue?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to address audience in Malaysia and beyond in the ASEAN region. From our side, we feel it's a great privilege as well as of great importance to have not just the US but also other countries that exert significant influence over global economy, geopolitics, actually coming out and discussing face to face, despite some differences that may exist. I really what echoed with me in yesterday's opening concert. We have a tradition of opening with a musical piece, and our interim co-chair, one of our interim co-chairs, Larry, actually said that it's also very similar to music. You may not take to it immediately, but there are chords that don't seem to balance or harmonize with one another. But over time, I think, if you appreciate music, you will, and also if you listen, if you commit to opening up, I think, it also creates a positive dynamic. So that's what we are hoping. More concretely, I think for especially regions like ASEAN, where, there have been traditionally, I think, dependency both, with the US and China and other major economic players. I think the theme of resilience will continue to be emphasized, and whether it's actions or policies from the US, Washington or Beijing, I think that will only further advance, let's say, leaders and institutions' willingness to further create resilience, so that the region, the country's economy is not just dependent on one supply chain or one trade route, but is diversified, is actively seeking multiple different partnerships, which I think is, all in all, a much more sustainable way in this day and age.
We have had dialogues on other platforms before, in regards to geoeconomic and geopolitical tensions as well, be it directly or multilateralism dialogue. And at the same time, World Economic Forum is trying to do that dialogue again, and many outside of World Economic Forum is seeing this just another venue for another dialogue. How important it is to have that dialogue here and putting the right people, the right problem, I would say, challenges in the right group for World Economic Forum.
So for us, obviously, I mean, when you're here, you realize that it's a very different setting to either New York or any of the other G2G meetings. On one hand, there are clear logistical constraints, which I'm sure you've also felt, but there are upsides to this particular setting. Up in the Swiss mountains, I think everyone is in a way put in a similar situation, regardless of the size of their economy, the sector they come from. I think they go through a similar journey of being more open, letting their guard down, willing to actually listen more and also compromise.
Yeah.
So that's one, let's say, perhaps indirect effect that we are seeking. But beyond that, the importance, as you put it, of convening in this setting, in addition to, let's say, the existing multilateral corridors or multilateral systems that we have, is we don't, aim to replace any of the existing, I think, channels. It's much more to try and find complementary aspects, what we can actually discuss in unison with, let's say, 193 member states at the United Nations. I think, we can also try and help advance through having both cross-sectoral conversations across government and business, at the same time also involving civil society, youth leaders, next generation. It does provide, I think, a very unique setting where leaders, even leaders of countries, can actually, they're discussing the same issue but from a slightly different vantage point. And that's what we're hoped to add to the existing multilateral discourse. And we feel that as an organization that also deeply believes in the UN Charter, that the current multilateral system, although being tested, is something that we need to continue to embrace and also protect as well. So we try to do our part in continuing to innovate and also contribute with different angles and actors, but ultimately it's a joint collaboration.
Yeah. Multilateralism is facing difficult challenge this year, and many have said that they are seeing, because of that, they are seeing more mini-multilateralism happening around the world. How important it is for Working Forum for us to see it here, mini-multilateralism, and how does that work to protect that particular region? For instance, for Southeast Asia itself, we have ASEAN in those regions. How do you see this mini-multilateralism?
So the way that we see it is not that the global discussion should be further fragmented,
right,
but there is value in seeing incremental, let's say, achievements and advancements through plurilateral or regional agreements. And I think ASEAN is a great example, where especially through the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, where the 10 and now 11 member states have reached substantive conclusion under Malaysia's leadership, it shows the rest of the world that progress can be achieved. Maybe at a global kind of scale, progress or discourse may be stalled, but with like-minded countries, we should not cease to advance our collaboration and discussion. And I think ASEAN injects that enthusiasm and hope to the rest of the world through the collective agreements that it's able to forge. And I think we also see that with, again, coming back to the theme of resilience, when faced with external shocks, countries are trying to find ways to diversify and find different corridors of collaboration. And that, I think, hopefully will lead to more concrete achievements, albeit not at a global scale, but in a smaller, let's say, more regional scale. But essentially, it's a good thing because we continue to move. We do not give up hope, and we also see the benefits of collective action, despite some of the fractures that we see on the global stage.
The fragmentation, also the uncertainty, I would say, in terms of having the right policy, especially from the world powers, the G7, the US, especially Donald Trump with his foreign policies. That is clear cut. We know what they want, and in terms of discussion and all that. But how about the developing countries, Southeast Asia? For the past few days, what kind of concern do they raise when it comes to facing these difficulties and social challenges? Because at the end of the day, it's a thin line for us to walk by between two world powers, China and US. What kind of topics and concerns were raised by them?
So we've seen, perhaps as a silver lining, of the devastating impact of COVID, the emergence of a role and also a voice for the global south.
Right.
And continuing on from that trend, as we see also, let's say, more of a exertion of influence and power by major powers, we're seeing, let's say, other emerging economies, middle powers, stepping up in terms of their role. And by that I mean, on one hand, at the end of the day, what every country wants is peace and prosperity for their own people. So, in this kind of, let's say, contested field, how do we forge that for our own people? I think that's primarily what a lot of the leaders who are here from those emerging economies as well as middle powers are voicing. And again, coming back to the theme of partnership, it's not something that any country, maybe because of the smaller scale, that can do it alone, but it needs, I think, exploration of who else might be willing to join hands and join forces to forge exactly that peace and prosperity for their own people. The other thing that I feel is emerging is a sense of pragmatism, if you will. The global politics of, let's say, themes like climate change may shift, but then especially when we look at ASEAN as a region, very much prone to natural disasters, risks, further exacerbated by climate change, it's no longer an issue of politics. Yeah. It's actually about science, because science has not changed. And finding ways, if there is maybe less of a global leadership from countries that used to really lead in these discussions, how can middle powers and emerging economies step up and in a way fill that void? I think that's something a lot of the leaders have spoken to, that they are prepared, perhaps not with the same scale of financial resources, but with the sheer commitment because of the impact they know that these climate change and other disruptions will have. I think that pragmatism will eventually prevail and also lead to a much increased role for a lot of these relatively smaller economies.
Of course, you were talking about building up back resilience and also collaboration. This is very important aspects of it. At the end of the day, the businesses, the corporate sectors will also playing an important roles, and also they want some sort of clarity. Those days during Trump 1.0, they said, okay, wait for another 6 months, for instance, in order for you before you make any decision to invest and all that. But after 6 months, there's still no clear direction in that sense. Now Trump 2.0, it is difficult for them to make decision, corporate decision in that sense. And we heard that in one of the sessions by the industries. When we have Donald Trump here and also other world leaders voicing out their concerns, the way how things should be maneuvered when it comes to geopolitics, geoeconomy, how do you think that the industries will react to it? Will that give certain confidence to them in order for them to chart strategy moving forward? Will that be the case for them?
You've rightly pointed out that for business leaders or any leader, uncertainty is not a great thing.
Yeah.
They like to have more clarity, as you said, the ability basically to be able to plan. I think that's what a lot of business leaders have been asking for. Unfortunately, I don't think we're in a time frame where there's particularly a lot of clarity on the global stage. Myself also kind of reading the news, I also feel okay, I can digest some of the things that are happening, but what does it lead to? I think that's always the question that we have. Having said that, again, I think that over the course of the years, over the course of a lot of these shocks, and it includes, of course, shocks like COVID, a lot of the companies, but also governments and individuals have, in a way, built up their muscle for coping with uncertainty. Of course, it's not ideal. We would all want to live in a world where you can predict out 6 weeks, 6 months, and 6 years. But I think we're getting better at it, of factoring in this uncertainty. We would certainly hope that more dialogue, even if it doesn't come to immediate agreement, leads to widened, let's say, basis of understanding. That also further reduces uncertainty, because the worst situation that you could have is for different parties that don't really see eye to eye to actually cease dialogue, because then I think the risk of uncertainty, of shocks, suddenly then becomes much greater.
Yeah.
So the fact that we are seeing leaders here coming out despite differences, talking to one another, hopefully at least provides a little bit of, let's say, confidence. And also, as I mentioned, as they've built up their muscles and tolerance for risks, hopefully the global economy doesn't contract or stall, but really is able to chart forward despite some of these challenges.
When we went to a pandemic a few years ago, so we were talking about the new norm in terms of doing business, in terms of having the right strategy and all that. With uncertainty, given that we have geoeconomic, geopolitical tensions currently, do you see that we're going to have a new norm? If that's the case, what kind of new norms that the people, the business leaders, the global leaders, especially from the global south, should understand better and adjust themselves?
I think in terms of new norms, I mean, we're looking at at a macro level, perhaps the disintegration of the previous order.
Yeah.
The new order, I don't think, has actually emerged yet.
Yeah.
So we do not know what the new rules of the games are, but we're getting a sense of what is no longer, let's say, more valued on the global stage, what has somewhat lost currency compared to the past. And I think we also adapt and factor that in to our decision making. We will still need, I think, at least a few months, if not years, to fully understand what the new order that will emerge from this. But we certainly hope that there will be an order, there will be a basis for countries that are able to plan, calculate, so that it's actually basically not a jungle, but somewhat of a different, let's say, hopefully garden. Because that's what we've seen in the past decades since the Second World War, where the humankind have made remarkable achievements collectively, thanks to rules that were set, dialogues that were forged, and also the strong collaboration that we've had. Globalization and all the developments in the past decades were by no means perfect. I think there were things that in retrospect needed to be much more sort of put at the front and center, including kind of closing the gaps between those who have and those who have not trying to marginalize those who may have been left out from the progress of globalization. But I don't think anyone can deny the progress that was achieved, and we hope that whatever new order that emerges can also deliver that same amount of prosperity for the rest of the world.
You see that based on our discussion here, the topics from the world leaders, from industry leaders, community leaders, do you see that, especially for world leaders, policy makers, do they really focusing on the short-term risk solution first, given that they are facing difficulties now, or at the same time the decision or the solution to the longer-term problems, poverty, planetary health and all that, are they focusing on that as well in tandem?
I mean, as an organization that has always advocated for long-term planning, strategic, let's say, planning, we've always known that, especially for, let's say, more democratic governments or governments that see sort of a regular transition of government and transition of power, it's not easy for any policymaker to plan out with that kind of long horizon.
Right.
But I think it's definitely something that, if you are a prudent leader, you are definitely thinking about. Like, are you compromising the future of the next generation by doing something that may be able to resolve this issue in the short term, but create problems in the long run? I think that's something that a lot of leaders definitely think about. You're right that the current set of challenges make it more difficult for
It's
long-term
hard to
planning.
balance, yeah.
Because everyone is also in a way firefighting. They are reacting rather than actually planning and executing.
Proactively, yeah.
But again, as I said, I think this reactionary measures, reactionary policies are also becoming part of everyday, let's say, decision making for a lot of the leaders. So hopefully, whilst also reacting, they are able to carve out areas where longer term planning is needed. And typically for a lot of those agenda, you need a multi-stakeholder discussion. You cannot unilaterally just decide from either the government or the private sector. You need to get everyone involved, including perhaps even the next generation, to really map out what will be the impact and the consequences of some of those decisions. So we sincerely hope that there's still that ongoing. But I agree, it's not the easiest environment to do so.
Perbincangan saya bersama dengan Jok Lee, kita melihat kepada bagaimana bukan sahaja negara kuasa besar berdepan dengan tekanan oleh Amerika Syarikat dan reaksi mereka, tapi juga negara-negara membangun dalam meniti titian halus tersebut, bagaimana untuk mereka mengebudi segala strategi negara tersebut. Kali ini, sebelum kita menyaksikan ucap pertama oleh Presiden Donald Trump, saya bersama dengan Ketua Pengarah AWANI, Ashwat Ismail, untuk kita melihat. Ashwat menghadiri beberapa sesi sebelum ini. Perbincangan, diskusi bertitik tolak daripada isu dunia yang kebanyakannya adalah hasil daripada dasar luar Amerika Syarikat sendiri yang memberikan reaksi dan sebagainya. Apa jangkaan kita kepada ucapan Presiden Donald Trump? Kita dengar Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen yang menyatakan Europe kena ada spine dan juga kena memperteguhkan pendirian mereka dalam konteks hubungan dengan Amerika Syarikat.
Yang pastinya Donald Trump tak peduli. Sebab Donald Trump ni dia ada satu kegilaan yang tidak akan mempedulikan apa sahaja yang diperkatakan oleh mana-mana pemimpin atau mana-mana segmen masyarakat di dunia ni. Apa yang pasti adalah beliau mahukan apa yang beliau mahu. Dalam konteks ini kita kena ambil sedikit lihat Januari 2025. Sebaik sahaja Trump menang pilihan raya Presiden Amerika Syarikat, pemilihan presiden untuk penggal kedua. Beliau sampai ke secara virtual memberi ucapan kepada seluruh para elit dan juga pemimpin masyarakat di World Economic Forum 2025 tahun lepas. Beliau membalun semua segmen daripada masyarakat financial community ataupun business communities, juga dengan blok Eropah secara umumnya. Pendek katanya, di mata Donald Trump, tak guna seduit pun orang Kedah sebut. EU ni, apa nama, European Union yang Kesatuan Eropah ni. Tak boleh pakai 1 sen pun. So beliau membalun dan tidak mempedulikan apa sahaja. Kali ini kita jangkakan balun, cara dia membalun tu adalah lebih strategik. Kerana beliau mahukan apa yang beliau mahu. Sekutu rapat Amerika Syarikat, Kesatuan Eropah sebelum ini, hari ini kita dapat rasakan Davos kali ini, the US has lost its cause ataupun the US has lost its ways. And apa yang dah mula meresap di dalam sanubari jantung masing-masing adalah Amerika Syarikat ini sedang membinasakan international order ataupun order dunia yang kita lalui sejak lebih 8 dekad. Dan kali ini apa yang kita jangkakan adalah smash ataupun hayunan Donald Trump kali ini lebih strategik. Satu, Greenland. Kedua adalah mengenai Board of Peace Gaza. Dalam konteks Gaza. Ini dekat di hati masyarakat Islam secara umumnya ataupun sedikit sebanyak mendominasi pentas geopolitik dunia. Dua perkara ini akan menjadi tumpuan untuk ucap pertama oleh Donald Trump kali ini. Saya tak sabar melihat lagi beberapa minit ni apakah hayunan dia 360 darjah dia akan pukul sepukul-pukulnya seperti mana beliau pukul pada tahun 2025 di Davos, dan pastinya beliau tetap akan pukul. Dan dia tidak akan mempedulikan apa sahaja, dan kali ini allies ataupun sekutu rapatnya sudah merasakan yang keretakan international order atau order dunia itu sendiri. Jadi saya rasa untuk kita di Asia, apa maknanya ni? Maknanya dekad Asia seperti mana yang mereka sebut selama ini, selama lebih 20 tahun. The next decade is the Asian decade. The next Asian decades. Ini juga memberi gambaran seperti mana yang pivot ataupun mengubah sikit tumpuannya adalah kepada rantau Asia. Dalam konteks ini pastinya China. Dan kalau kita dengar dekat sini tak ramai yang bercakap pasal China sangat. Tetapi inilah dia tentang apa yang disebut sebagai landscape baru yang sedang kita hadapi untuk dekad-dekad yang mendatang.
Okey, kita akan nantikan beberapa minit saja lagi ucapan oleh Donald Trump.
Bukan ucapan, balunan.
balunan oleh Donald Trump. Cuma dia balon, cuma tahap mana dia akan balon tu kita lihat. Lebih strategik mungkin. Kita akan saksikan sebentar saja lagi.